episode 17 of the cruise, Jim Grant. You take the news and you put that with my name, which is Craig. You leave Jim completely out of the name, but he's here and he's telling us all about what's going on Monday, the 20th of July, 2020, the worst year of our lives.
This is episode 17 of the cruise. Coming up on today's show,
we could do it, Jim.
I always thought we could do it. Who's they?
You're not the they. I have a fictional projection of they that they're in opposition to our goals.
That's why we work well as a team. You've got the voices, and I've got the sources.
I've got the voices in my head, and you've got the answers in cold hard reality. Totally.
It's a nice mix.
Yeah.
So we've got the Met Office getting it wrong about swarming flying ants. We've got more about Ghislaine Maxwell and how that spider web can sweep off into other things. We've got more about perhaps why you shouldn't wear a mask. We've got the COVID data being wrong, possibly. Matt Hancock has said that. We've got a number of tests going awry. We're also going to be looking, if we've got enough time. I know there's a regular listener of the show called Robbie. We're going to be doing a bit about how someone has found a load of coins worth quite a lot of money with a metal detector. I know Robbie goes out with his metal detector quite a lot, so he's always putting kind words on our cruise Facebook page. So Robbie, that article's for you. We're also going to be looking at more about how the NHS was denied PPE because it was flogged to China. Now, if that all sounds like previous episodes that we've covered, you're right, but you can check the dates for yourselves. They're actually they're this week's news, and that's why I reckon we should call this episode 17. We told you so.
Nice.
So, honestly, yeah.
It's funny. Sadly, window into my intellect. The only thing that had me thinking, I know these ones before, was the coin discovery. Any other comments? Or obviously there was the Ghislaine we've talked about before, but that's the depth of my recall right now, Jim. It's just like,
well, basically, our first 16 episodes, 17 if you include our special. You can go back and look at it. And we're going, I reckon this is going to happen. I reckon this is going to happen. Or if you do this, here's that article, I think this is going to happen. Or we've heard that this is happening. We have, the mainstream's reporting that they think it's happening. So we're reporting that the mainstream thinks it's happening. And a few months later, it turns out we're pretty much right about all of it, really. So
what's the prize, Jim? What do we get?
We get
the juicer.
Well, if we're right about our next predictions, as soon as the cold flu season comes in, our prize will be another house arrest from
more lockdown.
Yay! That's our next predictions, isn't it?
That's what we've got to look forward to.
So our first article, and I'm going to really try and hit a lot of articles because I think we've talked about a lot of this stuff before. So it's most of the forecast is going to be us going, "Oh, aren't we great?" Just patting ourselves on the back. Weren't we wonderful? And I think we've given opinions on most of this stuff before, but yeah. So our first article here tonight, it's from the Sun. And it's from the 18th of July. This one we didn't see coming, and we weren't the only ones, because Met Office mistakes rain for swarm of flying ants invading UK and spotted from space.
I saw the story. I didn't know what the old denouement was. The old denouement. Oh, what? The denouement.
The only thing I've ever heard similar to that is when someone was doing a sonar thing of Loch Ness and mistook a school of fish for the monster or something like that. But you'd have thought these people are professionals, wouldn't you?
But to be honest and to be fair to whoever was working the sonar there, Jim, if you noticed enough fish together in any particularly UK lake that it looked anything akin to a sea creature of the size of what the Loch Ness monster is, fabled to be, you would not presume it's a whole bunch of fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I know your salmon are crawling back into the rivers, and I know that trout populations are said to be there's good word in terms of the environmental recovery of the UK, and particularly fish. In my experience, I I'm not proud of this, Jim, but I'm a fan of the salmonoid family. I don't know. It's a curiosity about their behaviors. They're a good harbinger for a healthy environment anyway. But to my knowledge and curiosity over the time of living here, Jim, things are like kind of looking up in terms of UK ecology. Have you seen they've got like a healthy population of beavers on the go? And
I've heard about that.
yeah, it's just not like, you guys are getting like kind of stuff's coming back to live here. And I don't know, exactly if it's because of the cleanliness or clarity of water or anything like that. But we're certainly going to be told from some fields and camps that that's exactly why they're coming back. So,
Wonderful engineers, beavers. They're really good for the environment. If you can put them in the,
Jim.
yeah.
They're rats. They're the fucking largest member of the fucking rat family, as far as I can see. Well, how would you feel if you were a birch tree and those pricks were living next door, Jim? Jesus Christ, they're horrible for waterways. Well, I mean, they're great and horrible for waterways. If you're into like manicuring the land, yeah, I mean, they could probably take over the Netherlands in 15 minutes. I imagine if they got to somewhere that cared that much about their ecology and water table specificities. Beavers are in that regard cunts. But as far as like, if you admire fastidiousness and heartiness, and those are the main ones. I'm just thinking like rats with teeth. I think they also did. Have you heard they die if they're not eating trees, pretty much, if they're not biting trees. I think they're
because their teeth keep growing, don't they?
Yeah, they've got like these like fucking born with walrus tusks. Well, you got to keep them back by chewing on the trees around here. You fucking imagine being born into that life, Jim. But here we are under lockdown on Mask Week. It's Mask Week. How did we miss that? Are we going to do like a Mask Remembrance Week next week?
We've got masks coming up in this episode.
Oh, of course. Okay. Sorry. Let me allow you to get through. You're halfway through the first article.
Well, just for the record, I think beavers are cute. But then again, I didn't grow up in Canada where they could be a pest. But right. I've only known them from nature documentaries. They look really sweet.
Have you heard? There's an interesting. We could bring up an article, Jim. They were. I think they first introduced them, if I'm remembering correctly, they introduced them to Scotland, and there was quite an involved ecology piece, like nature piece. I think probably back in the days when I would have been more readily, getting into a BBC article. May have been the BBC, but regardless, they were investigating or realizing that the Canadian beavers introduced were having problems like communicating with the Scottish beaver. I remember it being mentioned that there was like an accent difference. Like, although they're like, obviously to us, it's just, who knows what there's, I don't even know like the noise a beaver makes, but apparently when the Canadian beavers introduced were trying to talk to the British beavers, it was just like not going anywhere. You want to, what?
That's why I voted leave, Craig.
Hey?
That's why I voted leave.
Oh, I'll bet. Yeah, it's just crap like that. It's incremental, Jim. It stacks up, right? Like you can put up with so much of that, and then you're like, hey, I want an elected official that's accountable to me.
The swarm of flying ants.
Sorry? You can't really talk about it without like throwing in the you racist. It's part of that whole collage.
I thought it was great when that was their
only argument,
because there are. I was a vehement leaver, but there were one or two reasons to stay in the EU, and when all the Remainers didn't use those reasons, just called everyone a racist, I knew it was probably going to go well.
Yeah,
so
I'll bet.
The swarm of flying ants approached off the southern coast earlier today and was picked up by weather radar as a spell of looming rain. And it's not raining in London, Kent or otherwise, but our radar says otherwise. The radar is actually picking up a swarm of flying ants across the southeast. During the summer, ants can take to the skies in a mass emergence, usually on warm, horrid or wilderness days. A Met Office weather forecast revealed a rain cloud moving across the south.
Days?
Warm, humid, and windless days.
Windless days. That's when they choose to go up wild. Wow.
The insects which took to the sky for their annual event to form new colonies have been picked up by the forecasting radar. Much to the amusement of Brits, the Met Office confessed on Twitter, it's not raining in London, Kent or Sussex, but our radar says otherwise.
Wow.
So just before we move on, quick, you mentioned it. Oh, well, I mentioned it actually.
Oh, yeah.
Go on, then, your quick view on the Loch Ness Monster.
Oh, well, I think that there's probably an anchor of likelihood in the folklore that celebrates it, in terms of, if you look at the geography of the lake, the fact that it was in higher sea times, sea run, so that it had access to the North Sea, that similar to lakes in Canada that are similarly situated in terms of like conditions that created them and their historical experience. The potential that a sea a dedicated creature would possibly be trapped in a lake or left behind by a bygone era, then I think that there's probably an argument that there may well have been creatures in that lake that, as it lost its salination, probably went extinct without ability to adapt. We were talking in the last episode about as it's sometimes called, the Zambezi shark or the Amazon shark, but it ultimately the same around the world. The ever ubiquitous bull shark is capable of surviving. For example, one of its main attributes as a diverse creature is it's able to survive in fresh water. But I always love telling this story, Jim, because how does the Zambezi, how does the Amazonian, how does the bull shark around the world survive going from the ocean into estuaries and rivers and streams, even covering vast distances inland? As a seagoing shark, it pisses a lot. That's all that it does to keep its salination, its actual body salination in a frame that keeps it alive as a organism. It just, as soon as it gets into fresh water, it just pisses like an asshole all the time, just constantly getting rid of water out of itself to keep its body at its proper salination level. So I enjoy telling that story. But from the point of view of how that leads me to think that there were probably creatures capable likewise of surviving in fresh water after being left behind by the receding oceans of different eras. There may be possible truth to that, Jim, but the other thing is, and mentioned earlier, the big one for me that takes away any possibility, and similarly there's arguments parallel against Sasquatch, beyond the ones of people that are just like, what are you, fucking nuts? Are you completely? Of course there's no fucking Sasquatch, dick. Well, beyond that argument, the argument that it would be very, very difficult for a Sasquatch and likewise a Loch Ness Monster to keep itself satiated in its environment without the visible record of it doing so to even a casual onlooker. In terms of the main point that I'm making is that the amount of fucking 3-inch long, however the biggest trout in Loch Ness is right now, I don't want to disparage all of your ecology, but I wouldn't imagine the fish are very large or very plentiful in Loch Ness. I might be talking completely. You're talking your ass. They're huge and they're everywhere. It may be the case. I don't believe it to be the case. But the number of those tiddlers that a creature the size of the length of a couple of buses, or at least a bus's worth, would have to eat in an afternoon just to not be in trouble. And similarly, the Sasquatch is just like, you have to think, okay, so he's 7'7". No, he's 8 feet tall. He's got searing red eyes. He's as wide as a truck at the shoulders. And what does he eat? Like, fucking berries? You never know. Do dogs go missing here a lot? Like, has anybody seen my buffalo? Because like you have to get in the mindset of like, when you're looking for grizzly bears or any bears, you will find the carcasses of other animals. That's one of the main ways that they find those types of animals. Like, how do you know there's been a bear here? Holy shit! Like, that's pretty normal. You find like big, dead things around, half-eaten a lot in different places, hidden and pulled away and left for later, and those types of behaviors. So the idea that like the Loch Ness Monster is just eating like crisp wrappers that are chucked off the fucking tourist boat, and whatever chips are chucked in from the locks, and in the 8.5 minutes of summer that the Scots actually get, where a tourist might show up, in enough numbers to like throw their litter that would feed a whale. It just, to me, that's where it kind of the whole thing starts to fall together, Jim. Aside from the fact that you don't see like completely, hey, you see that dog that was swimming and now he's not, like, you don't hear those stories. You don't hear about like a half-eaten deer with strange teeth marks on it washing up on shore. You just don't hear about that stuff. There's no like substantiating pyramid of what you would think are the sort of behaviors that would lead up to like, there's one, And I also, I realized that there's a rarity. I once had this real pleasure of listening to. I quite enjoyed telling you this, Jim. Wolverines. If you don't like Wolverines, you're just not looking at him right. Like, the largest member, the most powerful member of the weasel family, great cartoon, great superhero, all of that going on as well. But just like the famous stories that you always hear at home, and they hold water, they're seemingly true, that Wolverines will like quite, I think, handily. Obviously, they put some effort into it, but like it's within their tool set, their remit, to at least ward off grizzly bears, right? Like, which is impressive. It's just one of those like, hey, like if they're both fighting over a deer carcass, like there's a chance the grizzly bear will fuck off because it doesn't want to deal with the Wolverine. It's just, like you already got all the weasel attributes. You've probably seen the stuff on the honey badger and all those kind of like, they're capable. And of course, one of the things that makes them incredible beyond all the other things that make them incredible are they're smart as fuck, right? Like really capable. I remember listening to this expert, which was curious as well, because he was Canada's foremost expert on Wolverines, Jim Grant, and he had not seen one in the wild. That was a wild insight of just like the Mr. Wolverine, doing an hour-long special on Wolverines on the radio. Just like, yeah, I studied them in the lab, but you don't find them in the wild. Just like, they're Wolverines. Just like you smell you coming 2 days away, and they just don't need the shit of you being around. And I say this, I have seen one from a truck, Jim, quite recently as well, within like the last 5 years, and I was blown away. It was amazing to see a Wolverine in my life. But it was like one of those kind of cross the road quickly type things, and but very distinctive coat. To not digress into that, what the documentary talked about was how they were able to not just hide a half-eaten carcass, Jim, but when not just snow would fall to like ridiculous depths, like they're studying them in conditions where there's like 10, 15, 20 feet of snowpack on top of the like shit that they hid for finding later. Not just could they find them almost easily and at will, like just, they got the cameras set up and they see them pad along, and they like come to a place that's now like, weeks later and 10 feet of snow below where they hid something, Jim. So whether they're using like the radar map in their minds of the trees or however things look from a perspective, I don't know, how they actually find what they do, but I think the majority of what they attribute it to is just the power of their nose. But regardless, they just like literally like show up where they've hidden an animal, 3 weeks later when there's a ton of snow, and they just like like just start right down, come up with an arm in their mouth, and that and the other interesting bit that was explained in that same like incredulousness was another feat that they had seen in the wild is the same scenario happening, Jim, but then avalanche debris like hammering the scene as well. So you've got like somewhere that's already like not pristine to where it was left, but has now got like, logs and rocks and, boulders of snow that have come through the same area. Same thing, Jim. Just like just different terrain. You just see them like skipping on, off each rug, and then just straight on down. Like, how the living shit would they have any idea? Again, I'm like proposing that they must have a signature in their mental map of how things look, but it's like they're an impressive animal. But you notice them, Jim. That's my point. They're like, little bigger than a black lab or, something of that nature. That would be a huge one, in fact. But, imagine like 200 black labs, Jim, that behave like a wolverine but are now swimming around Loch Ness. And like the only time that you happen to notice them is when somebody catches like a half a shadow from 8 miles away, and then, oh, he just went down. Like that said, I've seen photos of Loch Ness that like, are convincing, of course, but it doesn't hold, any water against the fact. To me, what would they eat, Jim? I know that was
I'm with you. I'm not a believer in the Loch Ness monster.
Are you not?
No, not at all.
Right.
There's no food for them to eat. All the photos have been debunked. It just doesn't ring true to me. And no fossils have ever been found or anything like that. And in a moving body of water, you're going to have something wash up on the shore. So, but Sasquatch, however, I am a believer. I think it's a Gigantopithecus. Yeah. And Gigantopithecus, I believe, was vegetarian, which would explain the lack of carcasses. And I saw this documentary only on mainstream TV about a couple of weeks ago, where they found something in a lake up in Bhutan or something, because they can DNA test the water now to see what's been drinking and pissing in it. And they found something that was
Another reason you can't swim in it. Did you see that, Jim? I saw a picture today on the internet that had it's authentic. I wish it wasn't, but it is. No swimming within 6 feet of each other on the little sign. You're allowed to go for a swim now, wherever this was. I think it was in Canada, Jim, but just like, you got to stay 6 feet away in the water, because now Cavid can swim 6 feet over. We live in a spiral of cascading madness, Jim Grant. Sorry to interrupt.
Speaking of a spiral of cascading madness, we should probably do a Sasquatch special at one point.
I love that.
Both of our folks. So speaking of cascading madness, if you haven't seen our episode special on Ghislaine Maxwell and other falling masks, you can see it on our Facebook page, Cruise. We think it's good. But Ghislaine Maxwell pleads not guilty in trafficking case. Maxwell, who faces up to 35 years in federal prison, was denied bail and will remain in custody. So that's from the Daily Mail. That's Tuesday.
I'm those people, Jim. I'm leaning with those people right now that I don't right now 100% believe that she's incarcerated at all. I think the whole story is more and more flimsy in terms of like her arrest and how long it took and how much they know about her movements prior to that. But apparently, did you hear that she had her own like private army protecting her? And again, how much of this is true, how much isn't, we don't know. But apparently, they spent the majority of their time evading people, just annoyed, like vindictive, anti-jizzer folks that are out there in myriad. A lot of people don't like her and their operation. Go figure. But apparently they weren't evading the police or the FBI in any way, shape, or form, but just like the abuse of strangers if they were spotted at all. And that led into something about how the mask mandates had helped her to be able to travel. And but you get into all these sort of things about. I think you and I talked about it a little bit, Jim. How little is known about her, how little is forthcoming about her incarceration, and these little secret deals. The the effort to have evidence destroyed just before she was arrested, all the stuff that we've talked about in the special episode 15A. If you want to know anything about this crap, get on to our 15A a couple of weeks ago, because we went into it quite deeply. But I'm still I'm just highly cynical, Jim. I'm highly cynical that this isn't all a charade, because the more we find out about it, the more you find out who her sisters were and where they worked, and that the whole thing is just a spy crime. It's a syndicate, and there's overlapping players in the previous legal teams, in the attorney general in Acosta in Florida. There's dark, and you got the bar Epstein, the Epstein bar problem. All these there's 1,000 stinking fish everywhere, and each of them is slippery, and none of this is looking to me like sooth of any sort.
Well, dovetailing on that, we've got another article from the Mail, and this is from the 20th of July. This is today then. Federal judge's son, 20, is shot dead, and a criminal defense attorney husband is critically injured after a gunman disguised as a FedEx driver ambushed their home 4 days after she was assigned a case linked to Jeffrey Epstein.
Wow.
The gunman shot and killed Judge Esther Salas's son, Daniel, 20, and injured her husband, Mark, 63. Wow. The assailant opened fire after Daniel, a college student, opened the door to him at their home around 5 p.m. See, this sounds like a professional hitman.
Yeah.
This isn't Black Lives Matter coming to your home to shout abuse at you. This is a FedEx. This is a professional. His father, Mark, was shot several times at the front door and is now in critical condition in the hospital. Judge Salas is believed to have been in the basement during the shooting and was not harmed. Last week, the judge was assigned a civil financial fraud lawsuit against Deutsche Bank. Investors say they were misled by the bank, which continued to do business with Jeffrey Epstein after his 2008 conviction of soliciting child prostitutes. Salas previously presided over the trial of former Real Housewife Teresa Giudice in a case regarding financial fraud. Her husband is a prominent criminal defense attorney who has represented members of the Bloods. He switched to private practice after serving as a prosecutor in New Jersey for more than 10 years. Friends say Salas frequently made remarks about being a target because of her job and receiving threats. This doesn't sound like a Bloods, Crips, the Mexican cartels drive by, don't they? The Bloods and the Crips drive by. This is a professional dressed as a FedEx driver. Ding dong, bang bang bang. That's a professional hitman.
It's a fairly common.
Over that.
Yeah, it's a fairly common undercover. Normally with SWAT teams, to my knowledge. I think that was pretty well known a few years back. That was one of the Fed's go-tos. I forget which sort of events they were. Found to be using that as cover, but it makes sense. It works to have a FedEx truck come around the corner, and you don't assume that there's going to be like 25 guys in full kit SWAT teamed up inside it. If you're whatever your particular larceny level of larceny you're into. I'm trying to imagine a scenario where that many SWAT team members would show up on your doorstep, but it's certainly a good way to move them around if you don't want people to see. So it doesn't surprise me.
I'm going to give you a gut thought on this one. Yes, judges and all that kind of stuff, they're handling that kind of stuff. They're always going to be in bother. But why now? Because Judge Salas had recently been assigned to a civil financial fraud case tied to Jeffrey Epstein. When it's civil, you don't have as much control over things because it's someone else bringing it rather than the government. So you can't have it quashed because the other person's going to continue their right as a civil enforcement. This smells like a Epstein-involved professional hitman job. If she was always in bother from the nature of her work beforehand, but why now, 4 days after the case? I'm going to make a prediction that this hitman is never going to be found one way or the other. Do you know what I mean? He's either going to have the people covering up
it's his last job
for him, or
he's playing low.
Yeah. He may already be at the bottom of go and look. where was this? Wherever this was, go and look for any new building structures being built in the next week or so. You know what I mean?
Down to the foundations.
And it just doesn't smell like. If you go and look at the stuff that the cartels and the gangs do, they're not FedEx drivers. You know, So we shall see. Yeah, but that was breaking news there, and I think the key to that is it's all about, because it's a civil one. You can't. You see, if we're going along the lines that there is going to be a controlled burn on the Ghislaine Maxwell Epstein connection, then you can decide what's prosecuted and what isn't. But with the civil cases, not so much, because someone else is bringing it other than the government. From my limited knowledge of law, but I am merely theorising there, based on what we just saw. So what's your take on that?
Well, we've talked a little bit before about when I've mentioned like justice isn't justice just because it involves the courts, So and I think that's a bit of American justice is law of the jungle. So you kind of when you have a place that's just filled with killers, Jim, right? Like just like killers around every corner, armed to the tits, every type of weapon you can imagine, gargantuan sums of money involved. If you're looking at like people aggrieved at Deutsche Bank and, the many billions, I'm sure, that's involved in the suit to begin with, it becomes, like keeping water out of a flood. It's just like, you're in a target-rich environment for everything to go badly. And we used to, I think I mentioned to you a couple of times how odd it was that when you think of when I first noticed when I was meeting, as a young kid particularly, but a teenager, random Americans, we go down to the States all the time and go camping in, Idaho and Montana and Washington and all these, California. And you just meet Oregon, meet like random Yanks. And it just always struck me that like how many of their relatives or close, sort of proximity relatives were veterans, just because you don't realize until you go to a place like America that's like just a warring nation, right? It's just like they have a massive military. It's not just massively funded, but massively attended. And, you get into that world of how many people are actual like veterans of combat. And then you put them back in the beehive, that, the American empire back in the lower 48, where it's just like festooned with, I think we've talked about this stuff before, where there were estimated during Obama, mid-Obama tenure, it was estimated that there were 400 million assault weapons. And I don't even like to use that term because everybody knows how misused it is for the type of weapon it's trying to describe. But like, essentially 400 million like M16s, AK-47 type of weapons in a, and again, we're going back like 10, 15 years now. We're back in a population of like just over 300 million at that point, right? So it was obviously, the point was made that there's like, everybody's got more than one machine gun for each person and extra. And that's before you get into like just like handguns used to come up into Canada, particularly when we had our like our weapons, our gun registry that ended up sucking up about 2 billion Canadian dollars. Just one of the greatest fiascos ever in humanity's history, let alone Canadian history. But at the sort of peak of that time, people were focused on once they couldn't buy weapons in Canada, how many of them would just show up from Detroit every Tuesday night, just like cars. But everybody could afford to just like buy as many pistols as they could in American gun shops and wherever the trade centers and where they normally get weapons, and then just run them across the border. Maybe every third, 10th, 20th car, 50th, 100th. Who knows how like porous the border is, but like a lot would get through. And consequently, it like flooded the Canadian country and gun market with cheap American weapons. It did the opposite. Similarly, I mentioned Obama because when Obama, and even prior to the the lockdown now, anytime there's a belief that they won't be able to get weapons, like, the potential that Obama was going to take away their weapons. It just spiked gun sales, right? Like, more than anything else in the world, spiked gun sales was the fear of that somebody was going to have, them not be able to have guns. So you have this country that's just like full of veterans, full of guns, full of like high stakes with no social safety net. And now you're into the sort of espionage category of things, and you're into like judges and spies and internet, foreign countries and their spy networks, and big high stakes gambling. Just doesn't surprise me, Jim, that people are going to get holes in them all over the place. It's just, when you're going to get shot for your shoes in different places in the States like clockwork, the idea that the more high level, aristocratic murders, if you want to call them, would take place is just not it's never been odd to me, Jim. I've lived, next to the Yanks my entire life, and then only moved to the UK for, the next half, and they're pretty au fait, or keep themselves, I did anyway, and living here, pretty au fait with what the Yanks are up to. And it's just like, constant high level madness.
Well, that you mentioned this isn't just anybody. This is a federal judge. So whacking her, to use the mob terminology, doesn't just silence her, but it can have a chilling effect to the rest of the message, to say, hey, Maxwell's in jail, but that doesn't mean this whole network is far bigger than Epstein and Maxwell. We know that. In our next article, I'm about to say. So there are people still involved, and it sends the message, if we can whack a judge, we can whack anybody. So you want to be careful what you say. We're still in charge. She may be in jail, but trust us, we're still in charge.
I had a nice, wonderful Indian in a like, I thought it was closed type situation. I went to a Quick Fit Fitters for the first time in Birmingham, and I'd had this crazy conversation. Jim, it's just one of those like early days. It's not like I didn't recognize, English accents, but it was like one of the first times I'd ever dealt with a really deep Brummy accent. And this guy who I left the car with to get the fucking we'd just gone into this like universe of misunderstanding about the muffler being a component of the exhaust system, whereas in North America it's kind of a lazy term that's used for the entire exhaust system. So he was trying to explain to me that it was all of it oil, but he was like saying it like oil. Yeah, I don't know if you can even do like yourself a good Brummy all, but it was so abstract to the word all that I'd ever heard. And we're trying to get to the bottom of like what bit of my muffler is fucked, and he's like, and I at the same time, Jim, I know it's like, a bit daft of me, but I was just like, why does he keep saying oil? There's nothing to do with oil in an exhaust system or a muffler. Why is he doing this? So like I had this digression, but I end up in this little Indian across the street, one of those wonderful moments when, when it's midday and I couldn't believe they were open, just felt like walking to someone's house. And I was like, you have, like, before we started the show today, just talking about having a nice curry. And, if the day's going shit, at least you might get a good curry out of it. So, and the guy had lassi as well, which at that time for me was like 9 times out of 10 when I'd ask for a mango, particularly lassi, they'd sometimes have sweet lassies, but not mango. But he had it middle of the day, nobody in there. Is like 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and he's like, yeah, I'd make you a mango lassi. I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing. So he comes back and we just have this, when you have them, Jim, I know we've spoken about that before, where you don't often have them, but I just end up very often in like Indian restaurants with nobody there and only the owner, and pretty much sitting at the table with me, just talking about like how crazy the world is. And he just went into kind of what India's like. What he said, it's the law of the jungle. When people are living in garbage dumps, and when the level of poverty is so high and life is so cheap, as we all know from the sort of analogies of that world. And he just was like, the police can do what they want, the military can do what they want, but as soon as they're not there, you can put up signs, swim only 6 feet away from each other, all that crap. You can do any of this crap. We got to wear masks when you go into the to the grocery store because you don't want to end up getting COVID from a papaya or whatever the madness in our world is, Jim. All this crap can be going on, but none of it matters for shit when just someone walks out of the woods and says, "Hey, do you want to give me your shoes or do you want to fucking die today now?" That's like, okay, the world's suddenly that place. It doesn't matter, you can make it affectations of what you want it to be, but that's what the world always is. There's always that chance that someone's just going to wander out of the woods and say, "Do you want to live or die for your shoes?"
And yeah, but no one's going to rob you for your shoes driving up in a FedEx van, though. You know what I mean?
What, rob the FedEx man for his shoes?
No, I'm saying no one who's stealing shoes is going to drive up to you in a FedEx van.
No, but there's another side of parallel to that. That's part of the same nihilism, right? Like I was thinking about it this morning, of all odd things, Jim, where I was just thinking about like, how do you kill a person? I was thinking like, how do you shoot them particularly? And then I was thinking of kind of like, I've shot animals before, and there's like an experience of that where it just like you're in charge. You're not, but for that moment, you take on the cloak of something that's in charge of another thing's existence. And I was trying to imagine how that leap is taken, how you can like just sort of justify, okay, I've shot a lot of deer or shot a lot of rabbits or whatever your experience is. For whatever reason, Jim, the people I was exploring in my head had Australian accents. We can get into why that was going on, but regardless, I was just thinking of like, how an Australian soldier, for example, might take the leap from like he shot a few things around the farm, and then suddenly like just a different look in the sights of what you're ending the life of. And I've never, in fact, I've had issues before with sorry, I had a call coming in there, Jim. My apologies.
That's all right. I'll just move on to our next story while you're doing that.
Yeah. It was the point that they're having to make that decision. Sorry, the point I was making is that like I've never elevated to the level of big mammal, for example. I've shot like a good number of smaller creatures, what they call vermin or rodent or whatever you want to call them. I'm not proud of this, Jim. I'm not, don't kill things that are just in a field having a good time before you got there. I'm not coming from that point of view, but I couldn't, and I had like some very Bambi-like moments in my life of running into larger mammals in the woods with the capability of killing them, and I froze, Jim. I just like didn't want to be in charge of that level of like carnage. A deer particularly, I ended up really just just really close to a big deer, really close together in the woods for an uncomfortable, like awkward if we were people. But like it was, it had that feeling of like, when is this thing going to notice me? And of course, when it either had and just wasn't like wanting to panic. I don't know what its mindset was, obviously, but at the point that it did kind of like spook, it spooked and it got the fuck out of there. But like I was a long time of in close proximity in the deep woods to a pretty good sized deer at cross size as well. Like just like one of the easiest targets you can imagine. It would have been weird just shooting that close in oddity to like have a good shot that that can throw you off in its own way. But there's no way I could have, Jim. There's no way. It's just like it was obvious to my understanding of myself and the world. It was just like there's no way I was going to turn. It wasn't my favorite. It wouldn't have been a great weapon to do it with. I had an old it's called a 12 gauge Cooey shotgun with just below birdshot in it, so like a little bit heavier, but not like a slug that you would want for that type of animal. But it was just obvious to me, Jim. It's just like there's no way in a billion years of reincarnation I am ever going to blow the fuck out of a deer in the woods if I'm given the opportunity to do so. But then earlier in the day today, I was thinking how to make the leap to then like a human being. I just know that like that's like so far beyond my spectrum of potential, capabilities.
Well, the answer to that is the people involved in this killing may well fuck kids. So that's probably
well, that's gotta help. That's gotta Got to nudge you.
I'll do it.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
So, and to give an idea of just the scale of this, and that it's involved at an international level and what you would call international organisation level, here's an article from the 18th of July. This is again the Daily Mail by Mark Hookham and Andrew Young. Countess who took 30 flights on paedophiles Lolita Express quits NSPCC. Lady Ivy, IVEAGH, flew with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell on trip to private island. The wife of an aristocrat who flew more than 30 times on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express private jet has stepped down from her role at the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And this isn't the first time. We need to do another special on international organisations, government organisations that have been caught in child trafficking. Because you've got the UN, you've got DynCorp. I remember Cynthia McKinney, a Democrat, one of my favourite Democrats.
She's awesome. She's so good.
Her and Dennis Kucinich, my favourite Democrats.
Nice.
And she was grilling. I think it was.
Your dark horse, Jim Grant.
Was it either one of the American people? I think it was Rumsfeld or Cheney. Someone from some of that era.
Good folk.
She was grilling them on DynCorp and still getting them money and stuff like that. So that's something else. But you know, this is a big thing which involves international organisations. Claire Hazel raised thousands of pounds for the charity by hosting a classic car show each year at her family's sprawling Elvdale estate in Norfolk. The Mail on Sunday last month revealed that the interior designer, who became the Countess of Evie in 2001 when she married Edward Guinness, 4th Earl of Evie and a member of a brewing dynasty, had repeatedly travelled with serial paedophile Epstein on his private jet. Flight logs reveal she took 32 flights between 1998 and 2000, including trips to his homes in New York, Florida, the Caribbean, and New Mexico. So there's these constant connections to
me. It's a connection.
International organisations and international government. Right there's an article. So, like I said, go on.
No, I think it's a little bit of a hey, look over there thing with her. Yeah, because I've read a lot about. I've done as much as I can to it. Was the period of time is curious as well. If you recall, that article itself might say, I think it was like those flights all took place within a 2-year period, whether it was like 1998 to 2000 or 2000 to 2002, kind of really early days in terms of like, there's famous anecdotes, you and I both know them, of people that were like going, hey, hey, look over here, for years and years. But that didn't mean that anybody knew anything actually, Jim, right? Like you and I both know that there was no actual concrete, similar to now, strangely enough, as far as like, the crimes to take place or that the public can confirm, for example. So to me, she might have been window dressing. There's that. I like to think that that's probably the case. She doesn't seem to me to be the type of nefarious, person involved. She seems to me to be perhaps somebody who was in over her head, out of her depth, didn't realize the horror of what she was contributing to. And I say window dressing because you and I both know that it would be important in those types of communities, if you want to horribly define it as such, that that's why they're going to want those celebrities around, Jim. Hey, Will Smith was here, Jim Carrey was here, all these the idea of like creating the atmosphere of this is kind of a cool thing, right on. Yeah, she's probably 18. Woo! Wow, is that Prince Andrew on the beach? Woo! There's important aspects of these people to create this world of where everybody's doing it, before they grab the attaché from Uganda and take him into the room and, try and get mineral rights off of him, like they through compromat. So to me, there's probably, I think, and this isn't you, Jim, I'm very aware of your acumen in this, but I think a lot of people can jump on these like red herrings, if you will, and overexploit them when there's nothing really to back up that woman was anything other than naive.
It's like when we did the episode, I think it was 13, where I explained the straw man concept and how I thought that cave was played in the Pizzagate thing. I see another thing here. But yeah, we'll have to do a special on government and international agencies and charities that time and time again are involved in child trafficking. And we will just be reading from historical mainstream documents. There's no need for anyone to send a FedEx van to my home. So I'll be reading out.
Did you receive your parcel, only Jim?
The special package.
Special.
Sign for this, please.
Ounces of delivery into your temple.
So, we'll just be reading from admitted mainstream documents, as we always do on this show. Myself and Mr. Campbell are not journalists. We have no sources. We are not investigators. We are really... What news repeater monkeys? That's what I call it. And we'll do a special on, time and time again, where government institutions and foster care agencies are caught running child trafficking again and again and again.
Right now, Jim, of NGOs as like espionage, as you and I both know, particularly like most recently in Syria, it's just rife. There's just not aside from like the amount that the directors are coining off the top of children donations. It's just madness. You get into the Miliband connections, and people argue, oh, you're just like you hate people who make money, or you don't like capitalism or whatever. It's just like, no, there's also an argument like, why is somebody who's like doing it for the kids making $500,000 beyond, I think close to $1 million a year as the director of a children's charity? It's just like it's what's the term again? It's obscene. It's obscene. So the idea that they're caught up in espionage at the same time, which I don't want to get too deep over my head here, but like they have been used. Certain, I'm not going to even name the ones that are in my mind because I don't have any reason to substantiate this, but certain NGOs have been used as ways to over decades plant operatives, of course.
Yeah. Speaking of We Told You So, on our Ghislaine Maxwell special, we also did a quick thing about masks, and I think it was on that episode where I said, wearing a mask for prolonged periods of time can reduce your oxygen level, and there's debate on how much it is, and it depends on the thickness of the mask and all that kind of stuff. But if you remember, I specifically said probably best not to wear one when you're running or jogging.
Sure.
I remember specifically saying that statement. Sure. So I found this article.
Kids in China have died. Have you seen that also? Sorry to interrupt you. I've seen that a couple of teenagers this week. Yeah. Again, how much can you? They might have had unknown heart problems, or that's the difficulty of these things, of course, Jim. But regardless, they had masks on when they were in gym class, and both of them are now deceased. So, you and I are both always hesitant.
It's funny you mentioned that, because this article is going to touch on this, but it's actually for the 13th of May. I should have found it for the special, but I couldn't. But I managed to dig it out for this one. And so when I said that, and I've seen all this news about masks, they're fine and all that kind of stuff, I realised, I didn't actually back up why I said you probably shouldn't wear one while you're jogging. So as you know me, I'm quite anal about sourcing things that I say. So here we are, 13th of May. Man 26 suffers collapsed lung after jogging 2.5 miles while wearing face mask. Schools in China have banned pupils wearing face masks during PE lessons after 3 boys died wearing coverings and taking part in running sessions. Well, that was the 13th of May. So a young man fell to the ground due to a collapsed lung after running 2.5 miles while wearing a face mask. Doctors say his condition was caused by high pressure on the man's organ due to his intense breathing while wearing the face covering. So, that would count as a COVID-related injury, wouldn't it? Because without COVID, no mask, no collapsed lung. So surgeons say the 26-year-old, who is known by the pseudonym Zhang Ping, from Hankou, China, had a puncture in his left lung and it had shrunk by 90%. Mr. Zhang was rushed to Wuhan Central Hospital. Well, there's a safe place to be. On Thursday, May the 7th, after he became breathless and started having severe chest pain. He wrote in a social media post that he is now recovering in hospital after undergoing emergency surgery to save his life. So there you go. That's a reason why not to wear. There's something that I was like, a friend of mine who is more conspiratorial than I. In fact, it would probably be a dead race between you and he on who's the most conspiratorial. That's how conspiratorial he is. He just come back. Yeah. You two would get on like a house on fire, I'm sure. And on Facebook, there was a video. The picture of the video comes up. It's only like a 10-second video or something, and you only see the picture of the video unless they put a thumbnail on it of the video. And it was a picture of him wearing a mask, driving a car. And I thought, of all the people that would be wearing a mask while driving, I would not have thought he was like that. Yeah. And so my heart sank a little bit there, especially and so I clicked on the video, and then he burst into song, and he said, virtual signaling in my car, it's not quite a Jaguar. Bing, bing, ding, 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 ding. Look, everybody, I'm keeping you safe. And I tell you, that made me laugh more than any, because I've got, we all know people in the comedy community, but that was the funniest mask joke or song or anything that I've heard. It really made me piss myself laughing. I thought it was utterly superb, and it came from someone who wasn't in the comedy industry, but that was the best mask thing I've heard. It was really...
Well, I like that. There's any rolling with the insanity to stay entertained. I think that's really important. I mentioned that last episode, either before we started taping or during. That's just like, I can't get drawn into the seriousness of the predicament we're in, Jim, and all this madness, because it's a depressing place to be. I'd rather just squeal out loud with how ridiculous it is. Hey,
yeah.
It's too depressing otherwise.
Let's try and blitz some articles in this last.
Yeah, I was thinking as well, though, that I wonder the sources for that. The people. This is where we get into trouble, Jim, because the people that succumbed, wearing their masks, and even the doctor's report within that, is anecdotal in itself. It's not like a double-blind study of any sort that is compared mask wearers against non-mask wearers in 2.5-mile races, and how many of the of both groups had a heart attack and died. It's just like, because those also don't exist, interestingly and curiously enough. But regardless, it just it comes across as propaganda from our side, essentially, that they're like cherry picking these incidences of people with masks on dying. But there's another bit of me, Jim, that thinks it's entirely and wholly rational to assume that, of course, that's why they're dying. Of course it is. There's no huge study to prove it, but would they have died otherwise? Probably not.
No, he didn't die. This guy recovered from the lung. I just remember saying on that.
Talking about the 3 kids that I thought were 2. They're dead, Jim. There's, unless we want to get into the China's fake news thing, because that's the other bit that always plays in your mind. It's so important, like you mentioned with the murder of the judge's son. That it's like the analogy for CCTV cameras. It doesn't matter if they're on. It doesn't matter how many there are. It matters that you're thinking they're on. It matters that you're afraid as a judge to make decisions because your kids might get killed and you might get killed and your family's going to get slaughtered. It matters that you think that the masks are saving millions of lives. All these things are like, it's important for you to have this impressed upon you. Whether it's true or not is completely secondary to anything. It's how you're being steered to think, and that's, to me, that's part of this. It's part of the 1984. It's part of the oppression. So it is the oppression. It's thought. It's making you change your thought without being told to.
one with these concerns. I'm going to try and blitz through these things now, but we've got an article from the Evening Standard. This is from yesterday. So hundreds gather in Hyde Park to protest against wearing masks. All the articles are found on the cruise Facebook page. You can see for yourself. So you're not the only one with those concerns. What's that?
What's the name of the paper that you were just reading?
That was the Standard.
Standard. Wasn't the Standard where the royal family in the 30s was doing the Hitler salute? Wasn't there? Do you recognize that? The kids and the Queen. And
I have seen pictures of Prince Philip with, shall we say, questionable company.
Yes,
and we're not talking about his son, Prince Andrew.
Exclusive. I don't know why I had those in the same place in my mind, but obviously they're there, married for some reason.
Oh, there are those pictures, yeah. And was it Prince Bernard as well, co-founder of the Bilderberg Group, and the World Wildlife Fund was involved in that lot as well. But that's another special course. And another one here. Health England's exaggerated death statistics are a scandal that has fed fear. This is 17th of July. Matthew Lesh, this is the Telegraph. So these are all the articles I reckon we can blitz through, because we've basically been saying for a while now, isn't it, that there's something wrong with the statistics and all the numbers and all that kind of stuff. And if you look into it, there's errors. And I'm just going to give you now loads of examples of these kind of things we go through, because I think we've given our opinions on it before, saying we smell a rat here. Yeah. So 22nd of May, it's not just the UK. This is MSN. The Centres for Disease Control and Prevention acknowledged Thursday that it is combining the results from viral and antibody COVID-19 tests while reporting the country's testing totals, despite marked differences between the tests. So first reported by NPR's WLRN station in Miami. I think that's Miami. The practice has drawn ire from US health experts who say combining the test inhibits the agency's ability to discern the country's actual testing capacity.
Sure.
So
false data doesn't help you figure out what's going on, Jim.
Yeah, funny that, isn't it? If you put it in, you get shit out.
Oh!
And if you get the modelling in the middle of a guy that's got a history of getting things wrong with foot and mouth, then the middle of it shit as well. Shit in, shit in the middle, shit out. That's reliable, isn't it?
Yeah, so, wait till you see Christopher Steele's new dossier.
Yeah. So it's even got to the point now where Herr Gruber, aka Matt Hancock, I call him that because he looks like exactly Herr Gruber from the
you heard that before, Jim?
No.
It's I think it's ubiquitous through the great powers that weren't the British in the lead up to World War I. That England, Britain was referred to as perfide Albions, and Albion the stinky.
Yes, well, that's a good one.
Like of all the betrayers of all the global players, perfide Albion. The roast beefs.
So this is the 16th of July. Herr Gruber, again accused of rewriting history over lockdown date. Health Secretary tells Commons March the 16th was precisely when lockdown started, in a claim branded as a barefaced lie. Health Secretary Hancock stands accused of trying to twist the truth over the coronavirus lockdown after a top scientist revealed the government was advised to bring in full measures days earlier. Patrick Vallance, the chief scientific officer, said the government was told on either March the 16th or 18th that the remainder of the measures should be introduced as soon as possible. At the time, COVID-19 doubling time had gone down to 3 days, Valiant said. While schools were closed and social distancing advice was issued between March the 16th and 18th, Boris Johnson did not order a full lockdown until March the 23rd. I'm going to defend ever so slightly Herr Gruber here and say he may have had a slip of the tongue. We've all done it. He's up there giving a speech. He's got his numbers cocked up. I'm sure we've done it on our podcast. Someone could go back to any one of our podcasts and go, oh, I think you've got the numbers slightly wrong there. So, it is possible. But then again, it is possible that he's just, they've got away with so much deception. He's gone, I wonder if I can actually tell something that is demonstrably false and not get picked up on it. So who knows on that one? But that's possible as well.
I think you know where they got that plan.
Yeah. And your concerns about masks are shared by none other than the Donald Trump, President of the United States. Donald Trump vows not to order Americans to wear masks.
Well, they have personal rights and freedoms there, Jim.
Yes.
They have a constitution.
Yep. If people want to wear masks, wear it, but he's not going to force people to wear them. His comments came as top infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci urged state and local leaders to be as forceful as possible in getting people to wear masks. That's now, of course. If you go back 3 months, you'll say that people shouldn't wear masks. So Donald Trump, for whether you like him or not, has had a consistent message. Fauci has been all over the place. Yep. And we'll be visiting back with him, I do.
Yeah, that's such an important aspect of it, Jim, that, it has to be looked at from the point of view, and I think we've spoken of these types of things before. It's important not to get drawn into side battles and, as you said, described so well, straw man type arguments regarding this. It's not an arguable thing that personal rights and freedoms are such that that's choices that you have as an individual to whether or not you wish to participate or not, to engage in. And, something that affects your life and your health is your decision to make based on the information that you interpret. And that people want to get into the rabbit holes of, what's that information? Well, I heard if you wear a glove on a Tuesday and then you don't kiss papayas ever, that you can't pass it on to people, but sometimes can if it's Monday, all the nonsense and crap that's along with it. It's just no, I've looked at things, not really into, I got friends and family and people that I want to pour my love into, don't have a lot of time to spend, trying to argue with you about whether or not the M95 or the N95 is better than your old t-shirt that you've wrapped around your dumb face. I don't care about getting into debates with people about it. It's we have rights, and some people don't feel that we have any personal rights left. So it's basically you're fighting hive mind. It's global, if you will, communism versus individual rights and freedoms, which is true whether it's liberté in France or republicanism in its libertarianism in its purest form in America. It's the rights of the individual against the rights of the mob. And that's what we're in now. We're in a war. We're in a global war, and there's parts of Portland, Oregon, where you don't want to fly below 1,000 feet because you'll get shot out of the sky, because that's only for people contributing to the civil emergency that's taking place on American soil. While there's snatch squads from federal agencies taking black pajamaed black bloc Antifa, maybe, if not, other federal agents, most likely into custody, if everything we know about those types of scenarios is true. So, this is the world we're in, and it's not about masks. It's not about masks. The conversation isn't about that. It's whether or not you respect me to have my own decisions that are based upon my autonomy as a person to make them, or not. And we're in a world now where people seemingly, it's unbelievable. We have a hero in Donald Trump, Jim Grant. How crazy is that? You gotta look up to somebody who on other levels is one of the most unsavory individuals you can possibly pull out of the bag of puppets to find any solace in. And here we are, having to recognize at least he's not that mental.
Yeah, well, the hive mind mentality is what it's all about. You touched upon it, because they've moved from masks protect you to masks protect others, because there's variety of evidence.
They're buffering you up for the herd immunity attack from a vaccine introduction point of view, of course.
It really does have to be at this point in terms of Boris Johnson, because we're told that the whole vaccine school of thought is, we give you a vaccine, we give you a little bit of the virus so that your body builds up an immunity to it. That's how vaccines work. And it kind of simulates someone getting the virus themselves. So if we've had the COVID virus, you build up your antibodies to it, you become immune to it. That's the school
training. Yes.
So when you think about it, it really does have to be about protecting other people, because otherwise we have been told that if you get COVID, you build up an immunity to it. Hence, that's why they're developing a vaccine. That's how it's thought about it. We're also told that Boris Johnson almost died of COVID, and yet that would mean he has now built up an immunity to it. So in that case,
the Americans went to the moon.
The only reason he'd be wearing a mask is to protect other people, surely, because otherwise, if he's already had it, he wouldn't get it again, especially within a couple of months. And you see Boris Johnson wearing a mask all the time. So it must all be about protecting other people now. And so
it's COVID, because who knows what COVID can do? COVID, you have antibodies a week later, but then they disappear for 3 weeks and then they come back on your birthday, Jim. It's just like there's I remember when they introduced it's asymptomatic carriers. That's that spooked me, Jim. I remember when that was being talked about when it was still in China, and supposedly not realizing at the time that it's mid-January and it's already been here for since, if we believe is it Barcelona? I think it's Barcelona's sewage system that found it in COVID in or say they did in March of 2019. So regardless, it's rife and it's all through our societies. But we were told, when it was how many people were catching it on the cruise ship, of course, that asymptomatic carriers were spreading it. And that freaked me out, Jim. I remember being freaked out by that, just thinking, what? Like, people can have this for 2 weeks, 22 days. The record, you and I both know, 41, 42 days. The person that was asymptomatic and then manifested again. And then you started to hear the other anomalies that, people would catch it, defeat it, and then catch it worse again in a few months or a couple more weeks, or then catch a different strain of it, apparently. So all these different anomalies, but the big one that spooked me was the fact that because that makes it unlike flu, doesn't it, Jim? One of the great differentiations between COVID, SARS, COVID 2, and seasonal flu is that people who don't have symptoms can spread it. So now that's when it went kind of zombie film. You and I both know that's when it was like, you're a bit freaked out now because people, can have latency for 2 weeks where they're just wandering around, shaking hands, going to birthday parties and freaking saying, seeing their buddies at the pub. And they've, given thousands of people something that they didn't even know they had for another week. Yeah, right. That's what became kind of spooky, right? And now, so all of this is hard for me to take on board because as soon as you start to talk about someone getting it and then being immune to it, that's just been shown to have holes in it and not be a definitive, statement.
Everything's shown to have holes in it.
Totally.
The tests, the data, how long you can be asymptomatic for it, whether you should or shouldn't wear a mask. But there's so many holes in all of these things now. Who knows what's accurate? We're going to be. I just want to blitz about a few more
sides, Jimmy.
To really cover that.
Big holes.
Yeah, big holes. The lockdown, we needed one or we didn't need one. According to Frederick Forsyth, our next article from the Express, this is the coronavirus lockdown may have been unnecessary, says Frederick Forsyth. There is growing body of evidence, if it is ever proved true, and it may well be when our present nightmare is over, would leave the government's policy over the past 20 months in discredited tatters. This is from the 5th of June 2020. I have read that right. Government's policy over the last 20 months. So I should probably go into that. Anyway, we don't have time. Read for yourself. It might be a typo. I haven't misread it.
Is the Cabinet Office coup?
Is it something else worth considering as well? The CNN. This is an article, a blast from the past I brought up for you, September 27th for 2018. Flu season deaths.
Yeah, that's really handy, Jim, because when the Communist Party of China speaks, it's generally in Mandarin and you don't know what they're saying. So it's nice to have the CNN there just translating for them.
Yeah, the Chinese news network. But this, I have no reason to doubt this, like the vast majority of the stuff they put out. The flu season deaths top 80,000 last year, CDC says. So an estimated 80,000 Americans died of flu and its complications last winter, according to the US Centers. So this means it was the deadliest season in more than 4 decades since 1976. So just worth bearing in mind with the numbers.
You didn't care. Remember back to when you just didn't affect your life and you didn't care at all. Remember back then, how recent that was. The best one is the 2017, 2018, 50,000 deaths, 52,000 deaths in the UK in flu season, Jim, that ended up being 400 or 450. An overcount. We've talked about this before. An overcount of 150 times Not 150%. Not like, 15 people didn't die. It was only 10. Like 150 times. So, like fucking thousands upon thousands of extra deaths that the Office of National Statistics just tallied up as like, yeah, just call them flu deaths and see if we can't like get these people to double shot their flu vaccines next year, like this entire operation is designed to do for COVID. How people, all you got to do is look into the behavior of these utter charlatans and criminals prior, and you see where this is going, because that's all they do. It's what they're up to. That's what this is about.
Well, it sounds like Matt Hancock may have listened to Cruise, because this is an article from the 7th of July.
I hope he didn't have his hand on his cock when he was doing, hey, you're okay.
Herr Gruber orders urgent review of PHE COVID-19 death figures. Move comes after it emerges statistics may include people who died of other causes. Imagine that, Craig. We've been saying that now for 17 episodes.
I think
there's a huge difference between dying with and from.
Yeah, I keep hearing when you say Herr Gruber, I immediately think that that's what you're using as a nickname for Matt Hancock.
That is exactly.
Is that what you're using? Okay, I thought it was the author of the article. Hilarious. Okay, what's the expression? Where's Herr Gruber from?
Herr Gruber, Matt, go into Google and pick up. Do you remember a British sitcom called Hello Hello?
I'm familiar with it, yeah, but I don't know anything about it.
Go and look up a picture of Herr Gruber, the character for that, and then put it side to side next to Matt Hancock. It's just my own little personal take on it. But no, it's just a real cheap gutter humor joke, which I built.
Oh, I thought earlier in the episode you were talking about the person who wrote the article as well. I thought this Herr Gruber is quite a journalist I've not heard from before.
So, the author of this article from The Guardian is Heather Stewart, and that's Friday the 17th of July. So the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, aka Herr Gruber, is ordering an urgent review of the daily COVID-19 death statistics produced by Public Health England after it emerged that it may include recovered former sufferers who could have died of other causes. So there you go. We've been saying all along there's a difference between died of with and from. So bearing in mind, so the numbers of the deaths are dodgy, and we've talked about the tests from the Tanzania president coming up false. But here's another one. This is a good one. This is July the 16th. This is Yahoo News.
Read on Twitter the other day, a guy said if they wanted to prevent people from dying in London, they'd be handing out stab vests.
Yes.
Sorry.
Good point.
Yeah.
So this is from Yahoo News. Andy Gregory. This is July the 16th. Fishermen test positive despite spending 35 days at sea and testing negative before they left.
That's what I'm talking about.
Argentinian health officials are scrambling to understand how nearly every crew member of a ship which spent 35 days at sea were found to have contracted coronavirus upon returning to land. All 61 sailors aboard the trawler tested negative for the virus upon departure from Buenos Aires in late May. They were then flown to somewhere I can't pronounce, a typical jumping off point for Antarctica voyages nicknamed the End of the World, where they were quarantined in a hotel for 2 weeks before setting sail. After weeks at sea, some crew members started to display symptoms typical to COVID-19 and the ship returned to port. All but 4 aboard the ship tested positive aboard their return. See, this is what we're talking about. There is a discrepancy. Totally. I'm going to put forward a theory, which I cannot prove.
The tests are fucked.
Yes, number one.
That's one.
Yeah. I've heard that that the COVID test. Well, actually, I kind of sourced it earlier by saying that the antibody tests and the whatever tests are all mixed into one. Here we go. COVID-like symptoms. Is it possible that out in the Antarctic they caught a cold, and the test kit picks up for someone who picks up all types of coronavirus, which includes the common cold? Is that possible?
Possible. Yeah.
2 have been hospitalized, one of whom is receiving oxygen. Is it possible that one of these people out in the Antarctic for 35 days caught a cold?
Yeah, and these other studies that you and I have both heard of, where people in close proximity with people who are determined to have had it, then don't catch it. Like there's all these other anomalies of where it's expected to behave and how it's expected to behave. If you remember back when the Diamond Princess again was the great study group, the great petri dish of how it could be spread, and possibly through the air ducts and from surfaces. Remember all the tests that we heard about, Jim? How long it would sit on metal, how long it lived on plastic and paper, and whether or not you should deep steam anything that arrives from the post from China if it's been less than 3 days out of the factory, or what. All these like mad ideas. I was thinking of how that's never discussed anymore, Jim. How it's like, sure, you're testing the people, but is it still like, is it on the potato salad? Like who knows where it's being spread from? What's the vector of the people in their spread in those situations? And then I of course, because I can't get it out of my mind, the saddest Last Supper ever, the Keir Starmer, what a utter buffoon of a human being, sitting around the picnic table in Scotland with his mask on, with his visor on, and talking to a couple of presumably representatives of the NHS in there. Some are wearing face shields and some are wearing masks. But my attention was drawn, aside from all the other absurdities, Jim, my attention was drawn to the literature that they had fanned out on the picnic table in front of Keir. And it's just like, I immediately thought, how long does it live on there, Jim? Sure, you can wear a mask on your face and you wear your visor, but like, who put down the magazines? Where were their hands? What were they last picking, and what part of their body, and how wet was it, and what's the temperature outside, and how humid is it? Is it alive on the paper, Jim? Did somebody lick their finger and look on page 9 of the brochure, and now you've come along and just brushed it while you're like asking, are there toilets around here? You've got COVID, because it's so catchful. All this madness that's associated with it, Jim. But we don't talk about that anymore. Did they both touch the same bit of the wood on the picnic table? Because it lives longer on the paper, but if you got there earlier, you could have got it from the wood. All this madness, Jim, that we all know is like utter bunkum, is utter fear porn for control, to get nitwits to do what the government says they should do without thinking about it, and take away their rights to do so. That's what we're faced with. That's what's going on, to me, Jim. And again, let's like dissolve this into, I know I'm an absurdist. I'm a buffoon. I'm a Yahoo, as they're described where I'm from in Canada. I get that. Like, you should see me when I'm drinking. I understand that. Like, but in how I'm interpreting this, that's how I feel.
We're left with a situation where we don't know how accurate the testing kits are, number one. Number two, we don't know what it's actually testing for, as the article said earlier. Is it antibodies? Is it the other stuff? Yeah. And number three, so I've lost my chain of thought, but that's pretty and the number three is, we don't know exactly how the deaths are being recorded and where they're dying from. So you've got a problem. Everywhere. We don't know what we're testing for. We don't know even when we don't know what we're testing for, we don't know how accurate the test is. Oh, there's the other one. And we actually don't know whether it's going to pick up other normal coronaviruses. So you've got 3 problems with the test there. Is it picking up other coronaviruses? We don't know how accurate it is. It's madness, and we're not the only ones that say it's madness. Sweden's COVID expert says world went mad with lockdowns. We say it on Thursday, Jim, that's all.
We just release it every week. What we say is released every week on a Thursday. That's the only difference between us and normal people who are just yelling at air on a bus.
Yeah. The man behind Sweden's controversial COVID-19 strategy has characterized lockdowns imposed across much of the globe as a form of madness that flies in the face of what is known about handling viral outbreaks. So our final article here tonight, this is for one of our regular cruise listeners. This is for you, Robbie. This is an article from the Express, and it is Wednesday, July the 15th. How amateur archaeologists hit jackpot finding huge hoard of coins worth millions. So think of that next time you're out in the rain doing your metal detecting, mate. Archaeologists were stunned. You could do the old Del Boy line. Next, archaeologists were stunned when a pair of metal detectorists in Somerset hit the jackpot by finding a hoard of coins depicting William the Conqueror, thought to be worth over £5 million.
We know people that know them personally, Jim. The people that found that.
Sorry.
We know, yeah. I'll find out if you remind me in episode 18. Get in some advertising of the cruise. If you remind me next week, if we jot this down, I'll get the details on. Yeah, we know tangentially people that like were pretty. It's either somebody's like a brother of or a very close friend of the. I think they came into about. I think it's like 5 million split between like landowner and a couple of people and some other like more minor contributors. It may be 2.5 mil, somewhere in there, but between 2 and 5 mil, I think, if it's fully appraised.
Adam Staples, 43, and Lisa Grace, 42, were searching an undisclosed field in Chew Valley when they got the shock of their lives, uncovering more than 2,528 silver coins. The couple, who used metal detectors to make the discovery, were on a weekend trip as part of a hobby they took up more than 16 years ago. Their incredible find sheds light on the aftermath of the Norman invasion and could show evidence of early tax evasion in Britain.
I saw that. Isn't that wild? Yeah. They noticed the weights tampered with and little bits filed off. You're familiar with that practice from ancient times?
Oh yes, yeah. And that's I think where the old thing came from. The old pieces of eight used to cut the coin into pieces of 8 because you had a problem with the currency getting across to parts of the world.
Well, that's where I believe the expression, like for North America, came as the quarter, right? It was the quarter of the piece of 8, to my knowledge. I don't know that much about it, obviously, but and I guess there were similar genesises of phasing out precious metals from coinage for the same reasons. Because at a point, I forget when it was in the States, we could look into it, when penny, for its value of copper, became much more valuable than a penny. When like a penny's worth a couple of pennies, it's like people would start to melt them down and use them not as pennies anymore. Yeah. Right? Like, hey, did you hear the government's giving you money at double the rate? Yeah, go get a bag of pennies. So then back when nickel had nickel in it, right? Like,
yeah. There you go, Robbie. Keep on metal detecting. This time next year we'll be millionaires. So as ever, want to round up the show today by saying please like our Facebook page.
Please like us.
Yeah. Oh, don't have to like us, just our Facebook page. Yeah.
Please like us.
And subscribe on our YouTube channel. And the best thing of all to do in terms of getting people out there is sharing it on your social media as well. So thank you ever so much for watching. Any closing comments for
Not in the slightest, Jim. I look forward to episode 18 already, but we'll get this out to you on Thursday, of course. It's only Monday! What craziness can happen before we're masked up for the weekend if we go into a grocery shop? What a world, Jim.
What a world. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed episode 17. See, we told you so. Cheers.